Welcome to the Terror Time.
The first story is about the whispering walls. I was once home alone in what seemed like an ordinary house. It had been a month since I moved in, and everything felt off from the very beginning. The old creaky floors, drafty windows, and the persistent chill in the air made it unsettling, but I chalked it up to the house's age. The first few nights passed without incident, but strange events soon began to unravel a sinister secret that had been waiting in the walls. The first signs were subtle, whispers in the walls. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me, or maybe the wind creeping through the cracks. But as the days passed, those whispers became louder, more distinct, until it was impossible to ignore them. Each night, I would lie in bed, hearing voices echoing through the house, almost as if the walls themselves were alive. One night, while sitting alone in the living room, the atmosphere suddenly changed. The air became thick, almost suffocating. I remember reaching for the light switch when the bulbs flickered violently before plunging the room into darkness. I grabbed my phone to use the flashlight and slowly moved around the room, trying to stay calm. But as the dim light of my phone illuminated the far end of the room, my blood ran cold. There, standing just beyond the shadows, was a figure. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, an illusion caused by my phone. But as I stared, the figure remained. It was tall, motionless, and seemed to blend into the darkness. I couldn't see any features, just the unmistakable outline of a person watching me. My heart pounded in my chest, but I couldn't bring myself to move. I wanted to scream, but fear had stolen my voice. Just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure faded into the shadows, leaving me in complete darkness. I sprinted upstairs, locking myself in the bedroom, convincing myself it had been my imagination. But deep down, I knew something was horribly wrong with the house. Over the next few nights, the situation escalated. I would hear footsteps pacing outside my bedroom door late at night, the soft creak of floorboards as if someone or something was wandering the halls. At times, the air would grow cold, cold enough to see my breath, even though the heater was running full blast. Determined to find proof that I wasn't going crazy, I decided to set up a CCTV camera in the living room, hoping to capture whatever was causing these disturbances. For a few days, everything seemed normal. The camera recorded nothing out of the ordinary. But then, one night, it caught something that sent chills down my spine. As I reviewed the footage the following morning, I noticed something strange around 3 a.m. The camera had captured a faint figure standing in the center of the living room. The figure was barely visible, almost like a shadow, but there was no denying its presence. As I watched in disbelief, the figure seemed to move, but not like a person. It flickered, as though it was shifting between this world and another. The footage showed the lights flickering wildly, and then, in an instant, the figure turned to face the camera. It had no face, just a blank, black void where its features should have been. Then came the scream. A loud, bone-chilling scream that pierced through the recording. It didn't sound human. It was primal, a scream filled with anger and torment. I slammed my laptop shut, unable to watch anymore. That scream echoed in my mind for days, tormenting me, making me question my sanity. The following night, I invited my friend Sarah over. I needed someone else to witness what I was experiencing. Someone to confirm that I wasn't losing my mind. We sat in the living room, trying to act normal, watching a movie. But as the clock approached midnight, the temperature in the room plummeted. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I could see my breath misting in the cold air. Sarah looked at me, eyes wide with fear. "Do you feel that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sudden silence. Before I could respond, the lights flickered once again. Then, the whispers returned, louder this time, as if they were right next to us. Sarah's eyes darted toward the corner of the room, and she gasped, pointing a trembling finger. I turned to look and saw it. The shadowy figure was back, standing in the corner, but this time it wasn't alone. There were more of them. 4, maybe 5 shadowy figures, all standing in the room, their bodies flickering in and out of the light. They were creeping toward us, slow and deliberate. My heart was racing, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. We backed against the wall, too terrified to move. Sarah pulled out her phone trying to record what we were seeing, but the second she raised it, the figures vanished, dissolving into the darkness. I couldn't stay in that house another minute. The very next day, I packed up what I could and left, abandoning everything else. I haven't been back since, and I never will. But even now, in the dead of night, I sometimes hear those whispers. And the footage of that ghost caught on camera, it's still there. A constant reminder of the real horror I lived through. The second story is about the possessed mirror. I was once staying at my friend's house, a place I had visited many times. It was an old Victorian-style home passed down through her family for generations. Though charming on the outside, there was something about it that always gave me chills. My friend Mia had never mentioned anything unusual about the house, so I dismissed it as my own unease around older buildings. But that night, I learned how wrong I had been. Mia's parents were out of town, and she had asked me to keep her company while she worked the night shift at the hospital. I agreed, thinking it would be a relaxing evening. I settled into the guest room, a space I had stayed in several times before, and began reading some of my favorite creepy stories to pass the time. By midnight, a strange uneasiness crept over me. The room felt colder than usual, and I could hear the old house groaning as it settled into the night. The only light came from the small bedside lamp, casting long shadows on the walls. As I lay in bed, flipping through my phone, I caught something out of the corner of my eye. There, in the antique mirror across the room, I saw movement. I sat up, staring at the reflection. My heart started racing, but when I looked around the room, everything was still. I convinced myself it was just my imagination, perhaps a trick of the light, and tried to brush it off. But as I lay back down, I saw it again, a flicker of something dark moving in the mirror. I got up to take a closer look, feeling a strange pull toward the old, ornate frame. The mirror had been in that room for as long as I could remember, but I had never paid much attention to it. As I stood in front of it, my own reflection seemed off, distorted in some subtle way that I couldn't explain. It was as if the mirror wasn't just reflecting me, but something else. That's when I saw it. A figure standing behind me in the reflection. My blood ran cold as I spun around, but the room was empty. I looked back at the mirror, and the figure was still there, standing just behind where I was standing. It was tall, shadowy, with glowing red eyes that stared directly at me. I stepped back, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure didn't move, but its presence felt overwhelmingly real, as if it were more than just a reflection. I wanted to scream, to run out of the room, but my legs felt frozen. I stood there, paralyzed with fear, unable to break away from its gaze. Suddenly, the figure in the mirror lunged forward, pressing against the glass, as if trying to break through. The mirror shook violently, rattling on the wall, and I stumbled backward, gasping for breath. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew I had to get out of there. I grabbed my phone and texted Mia frantically. She replied almost immediately, saying she'd be home in an hour, and I begged her to hurry. I couldn't stay in that room. I bolted downstairs, leaving the guest room door wide open, hoping the spirit, whatever it was, would remain trapped inside. I waited anxiously in the living room, trying to calm my racing heart. The house was eerily silent, but the unease lingered, a heavy, oppressive weight pressing down on me. As I sat there, the temperature in the room dropped again. My breath misted in the air, and I could feel the presence of someone watching me. Just then, I felt it, a sharp, cold touch on the back of my neck. I screamed, jumping out of my seat, but there was no one there. The cold sensation spread as if invisible hands were gripping my shoulders, pinning me in place. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. All I could do was stand there, my eyes darting around the room in terror. That's when I saw the figure again. It wasn't in the mirror this time. It was standing in the hallway, partially obscured by shadow but unmistakable. The glowing red eyes stared at me, unblinking, and I could feel the air grow heavy with its malevolent presence. I had never been so terrified in my life. When Mia finally arrived home, the figure vanished as quickly as it had appeared. I collapsed into her arms, trembling, unable to explain what had happened. Mia looked pale, her eyes wide with fear as I recounted the night's events. She admitted then with a shaking voice that I wasn't the first to experience something in that house. Her family had long suspected the mirror was cursed. There had been paranormal stories passed down through the generations, tales of spirits trapped within the glass, and even rumors of a demon haunting the house. No one had ever confirmed it, but strange things had happened to anyone who spent too much time in that guest room. Mia's great-grandfather, she revealed, had been an exorcist. He had tried to cleanse the house many years ago but was unsuccessful. Since then, the spirit, or demon, seemed to attach itself to the mirror, showing itself to anyone who dared to stare too long. I didn't stay another night in that house. As soon as the sun came up, I packed my bags and left. But the memory of that figure in the mirror still haunts me, lurking in the back of my mind whenever I pass by any reflective surface. I haven't spoken to Mia in a long time, but she texted me once, saying that she had the mirror removed. It didn't help. The spirit wasn't just in the mirror, it was in the house, and now it's in her. The third story is about the creeping shadow. I was once home alone, and it seemed like a typical night. I had always considered myself skeptical when it came to the supernatural. Ghost stories were just that, stories, nothing more than chilling tales people shared to create scares. But that all changed the night I experienced something I couldn't explain. It started with a creeping feeling that something wasn't right in the house. I had lived here for years, and despite its age, it was never what you would call a haunted house. There were no tales of spirits or paranormal activity, no creepy history to speak of. But that night, things were different. As I sat watching TV, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. I brushed it off, thinking it was just a trick of the light or my imagination playing games on me. After all, I was alone, and the mind tends to wander when there's no one around. But this wasn't just any ordinary shadow. It lingered, growing darker and more defined as the seconds passed. The air in the room became thick, almost oppressive, like something unseen was pressing down on me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as the temperature dropped. It felt as if the very air had frozen in place, trapping me in this creeping sense of dread. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but I was frozen in my spot. Then, I saw it. A face began to emerge from the shadow, pale and twisted, with hollow eyes that seemed to stare right through me. It wasn't just a trick of the light anymore. This was something real, something unnatural. The figure in the shadow was no ghost. It felt malevolent, dark, something that didn't belong in this world. A demon. I don't know how long I stared at it, but time seemed to stop. The only thing I could hear was the deafening silence that filled the room, broken only by the faint sound of breathing, except it wasn't mine. I was paralyzed with fear as I realized the breathing was coming from the shadow, the demon-like figure growing closer. Suddenly, there was a knock on the wall behind me. I whipped around, heart pounding in my chest, only to find nothing there. But as I turned back, the shadow had moved even closer. I felt trapped, helpless, as though the house itself had turned against me. This was no longer just a place I called home. It had become something else entirely, something haunted. As I fumbled for my phone, desperate to call someone, anyone, I heard the sound of footsteps upstairs. My blood ran cold. I knew I was alone in the house, or at least I should have been. But those heavy, deliberate footsteps told a different story. Someone, or something, was upstairs. I forced myself to stand, my legs shaking beneath me as I slowly made my way to the staircase. With each step, the footsteps above grew louder, more distinct, as if they were daring me to come closer. I couldn't stop myself. I had to know what was up there. When I reached the top of the stairs, the air was even colder, thick with an unexplainable sense of dread. The door to my bedroom was ajar, creaking softly as if something had just moved through it. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open fully, bracing myself for whatever horror lay inside. But the room was empty. I stood there, trembling, convinced that whatever had been there moments before was hiding, waiting. And then I saw it. Caught on camera. The small security camera I had installed to watch my pets had recorded something, and the screen displayed a figure. A dark, shadowy figure standing in the corner of my room, staring directly at the bed. The figure was no longer there, but the footage showed it clearly. And that's when I realized I had been living with something I couldn't see for a long time. I grabbed the camera, desperate to replay the footage, and what I saw confirmed my worst fears. It wasn't just a shadow. It was a spirit, a real ghost, something that had been in my home, watching, waiting for the right moment to make itself known. That night, I packed my things and left the house. I couldn't stay there any longer. I couldn't live in a place that was haunted by something so malevolent. And to this day, I haven't gone back. The house still stands, but it's empty now, just like the hollow eyes of the spirit that still lingers inside. After I moved out, I tried to forget what had happened, but it wasn't easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see that dark figure lurking in the corner of my room, waiting. And though I thought I had escaped, the nightmares began almost immediately. Every night, I would wake up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding as if that shadow had followed me to my new place. Then one night, I woke to the sound of knocking on my bedroom door. It was faint at first, but unmistakable. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, the lingering effects of my trauma, but the knocking grew louder, more insistent, until I couldn't ignore it anymore. Gathering all the courage I had left, I flung open the door, only to find nothing but darkness staring back at me. I knew then that this wasn't over. Whatever had haunted my old house had followed me. It wasn't confined to that place, it was attached to me. The shadow, the demon, the ghost, whatever it was, had found a way to keep tormenting me. I realized this was no ordinary haunting. It was a real horror story, one that I couldn't escape from, no matter how far I ran. Desperate for answers, I consulted paranormal experts, hoping they could provide some insight. They told me that spirits like the one I had encountered weren't bound by physical space. If it had attached itself to me, there was little I could do to break free. Some even suggested that it wasn't a spirit at all, but something darker, something demonic. The experts advised me to capture more footage to document any further paranormal activity. Reluctantly, I installed cameras in every room of my new house. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Weeks passed, and I started to believe that maybe I had finally shaken off the nightmare. But then, late one night as I was reviewing the footage, I saw it again, the shadow. This time it was standing at the foot of my bed, watching me as I slept. The camera had caught it on tape, and there was no denying what I was seeing. It was back,